Yes, the wine, the glass for the drinking. I didn't actually participate in the Twitter poll, but my vote would have been for wine, which may seem a bit odd, seeing as I'm going to be talking about development of resource discovery platforms and providing access to as wide an audience as possible. But I hope that my presentation today will actually speak to a bit of all three of those elements. And I'm here to talk to you about discovery, which is at the heart of our digital offering to our users and to the archive sector. Well, first of all, I should say a little bit about what discovery is, and the very, very first thing I should say is that I have failed to put the URL on all of these slides, which would be helpful. So I'll say up front that if you want to check this out as we're going and play with it while I'm talking, go to discovery.nationalarchives.gov.uk and you'll find everything there. Well, discovery is an aggregation of more than 32 million descriptions of records held by the National Archives and more than 2,500 archives across the country. Now, what are those 2,500? Well, they comprise the bulk of what we refer to as the archive sector, and they inhabit a spectrum from public national bodies like the National Archives across to private archives, including business archives and personal private archives. In the first place, Discovery was built as a replacement to a couple of ageing platforms that just describe records held by the National Archives, and those were the Catalogue, imaginatively named, and Documents Online, which was our digital asset delivery platform. And by 2013, those two services had been retired, and we were left with this new resource. My paper today is about how Discovery has been extended to include or represent the wider archive sector and grow from representing one archive's catalogue and organisational data to 2,500 and more, potentially. So, what you have on screen here is a quote from Archives for the 21st Century in Action. This is obviously a government document that you all know well, the Archives, the UK Government Archives Policy, which called in its fourth recommendation for comprehensive online access for archive discovery through catalogues and to digitised archive content by citizens at a time and place that suits them. Now, this is an ambition that is not new, and it's certainly not new in the last 5 years, and it goes back to the late 90s when archivists began to recognise the value of the internet for sharing catalogue and other collections information online. And that manifests itself in a number of different projects, some of which I'll mention here. In support of its role as sector lead, which we acquired in 2011, the TNA action plan made a further commitment to extend Discovery to provide a single point of online access to catalogue and organisational data from across the archive sector. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we went about doing that and what it meant. So how did we get from having 20 million descriptions of just TNA content to having 32 million for the wider sector? Well, in the first instance, what we did was to incorporate a number of different legacy resources, the National Register of Archives, the Archon Directory, Access to Archives, and the Manorial Documents Register, all of which are looking out across the array of collections in the wider sector. Why do we have these? Well, although TNA assumed the sector leadership role in 2011, it's got a long-standing commitment to the wider archive sector. Access to Archives was a project with a number of partners to sort of kick-start the migration of paper catalogues to the digital realm. So there's a lot of retro conversion, and that resulted in around 10 million descriptions for over 400 archives. And the National Register of Archives, which is an older initiative, which has been which has resulted in collection level summaries for more than 500,000 collections organised according to the creator of those records, and that's a 70-year-old endeavour now, so it's a hybrid paper digital process. And similarly for the Manorial Documents Register, which used to be a number of paper index cards, which has been rolling on steadily through a series of computerisation projects to a point where we've got the end in sight now. So, scary image there. In 2011, we started to consult with our stakeholders about what they saw the future of those different resources would be. And at that point, it was by no means certain that they would all feed into Discovery, or whether Discovery was a platform that could work for all of those, although we had in mind that might be one of the outcomes. And to do that, we started a number of consultations. We gathered feedback from users and contributors, so the contributors being the archives that had contributed data to A2A and NRA. We also held focus groups, ran online surveys, collected feedback from staff at TNA, including in the Archive Sector Development Department, which is the team I'm a member of, who were responsible for managing those different resources. And the end result was more than 400 detailed requirements. Now, these requirements started out life a little bit like this. Now, I confess that this image of post-it notes is not from that 2011 survey, it's later, and this is from one of our breakout rooms, and it will be known better to my colleagues in the web team. It's to do with the website redesign project. But I've given it a sort of Instagram-y look, so you can't read any of the notes. I've got a more transparent one later on. So the first challenge, having captured all those requirements, was how we'd migrate the data, and then to build a user interface that could handle all of the different types of information therein. And from the outset, that process was agile and iterative, which is a big step change, I think, and from any past projects that we'd worked on and any of our information resources, which resulted in a finished big bang type approach. And I think that's been one of the challenges that I'll open up to here, is sort of communicating that and bringing people along with us as we work in that agile way, and we add new features all the time. But it's been a really good learning experience, I'd say. So how do we do that? Again, this is something that I've borrowed from a blog by my colleague Paul Lamy. And in the first phases, it's really about working out what will work quickly and cheaply. So rather than building a whole system, we do a lot of wireframes and mock-ups. These ones were just sketched in a session, which was a very creative session, and we were coming up with a kind of serial box of what we thought the homepage of Discovery would be like. So if you were going to really sell it, so we came up with a few different permutations there. And then some more detailed mock-ups and wireframes that may have clickable elements, one of which I'll show you later. And we seek feedback on all of this as we're going along. So we make sure that it's informed, it's in response to user need, and it's user-centred. And that's something that I've been really convinced by our web team and at TNA, where we've developed a philosophy of this user-centred design, which is aiming to provide services and content that our users need. So, right, now we're getting into what Discovery looks like now. So some of you may be familiar with this. And what we ended up with was something that was a radical departure from the old version of Discovery when it was just TNA content, but crucially also all of those other legacy resources, which had more of a beige look. And as you can see, right away we've got this kind of faceted search, very clear UI, options to sort, export results, clear links back to start new search, and also, if you remember from the home page, the kind of Google one box style, which is itself a departure from a lot of other finding aids for libraries, archives and museums, which have tended to favour, more often than not, having a number of different search boxes on their homepage. And that was really to set the bar quite low, because our audience is so used to the Google paradigm and how powerful that one box can be. And also in response to all of the user testing we did, we kept coming back to having a one-box version of the Discovery homepage as opposed to some of the other more complicated versions that we tested. So, next challenge. This is not a current statistic. It's getting on for a year old, but what it shows is that people access the National Archives website on a range of different devices, and obviously everyone in this room knows that and is doing that right now. So that was itself another challenge for our web designers to handle, and they cope with it admirably by making sure that all of Discovery, the whole application, was responsive in line with the redevelopment of our wider website. And that's to say that it looks different depending on what you're looking at it on, and it eliminates the need for a mobile website. And that really is a challenge I think, in archival finding aids, is making it work on mobile and how far people are going to conduct this kind of research on a mobile device. But the evidence is there, so we have built it. Right, this is a little bit about the different kinds of information that Discovery has now got within it. So in addition to 32 million catalogue descriptions, we've also got over 200,000 name authorities derived from the indexes of the National Register of Archives, and now also the National Archives name authority data from its catalogue. And this provides a really useful access point to the collections relating to British history. And more often than not, people will do a search, a one-name search. You know, things like John and Smith are, somewhat surprisingly, I think, the most popular search terms that we get. But you have to handle that and sort of get people from very, very large result sets down to something manageable and a way in. And the name authorities do that, I think. And what you have here is, I've searched for Nelson, and I've filtered by male persons, and I've got down to 10 results. Of course, this isn't every person ever, so it's notable individuals that have been indexed at some point. So the challenge is then communicating to people that this isn't going to be your grandfather, John Nelson, and there are other ways to approach that, which I think Joe might mention and talk about later, things like the Traces Through Time project, which you've heard laced throughout some of the presentations from my colleagues. Here's an example of a what we call record creator or name authority page, and you see Sir Winston Churchill. What these pages do is identify that archival collections can be wildly dispersed. So in the case of Winston Churchill, there's over 100 collections of records created by him held in 39 different repositories. And that's one of the striking things and feedback we've got, is that people have realised on using Discovery that there's actually a lot more stuff out there than they first thought, which can be, I think, variously very exciting and also quite disheartening depending on, on your outlook in that respect. Throughout all of that, we have developed a new Find and Archive service. So whenever you're on a record and it says held by Salford City Archives, held by Archives Plus, you can click through and you get straight away, you get Google Maps, you get information about when they're open, and then also the summary collections information. So this is, again, really helping people on their journey to actually go and look at the stuff, which I think remains the ultimate goal here, is the sort of physical experience of archives is not lost in this, and that the real drinking is actually going and getting the stuff and looking at it. Or it may be anyway, it depends on your interest. We also captured a number of advanced search requirements. So I said earlier about having a one-box homepage. Well, we also have an advanced search with many, many boxes and a number of different options, and that's because some people have much more complex research needs. A lot of what you do here you can construct using the advanced search, using the simple search and then doing a faceted search, but we have more or less the belief that everything that you can filter subsequently, you can also do beforehand. So the preloaded and backloaded searches. Now that Discovery's got so much information within it, the challenge is communicating how to use all of these different features. Obviously, our help and guidance has had to be completely rewritten to refer to a single resource rather than a number of different resources, and to reflect the ways in which you now have to approach some of this, some of these research questions. This is one particular tool, which is a sort of on-screen help, which is an open source tool called Hopscotch, developed by LinkedIn, and that was something that we overlaid on our search results, so it dynamically responds to what you've done and explains what all the different elements are. Just because there are facets on the left or there is a separate tab for records and record creators doesn't mean that people will click it, so having something like this really highlights what is there. Now there's a couple of slides really which sort of show off some of the capabilities of Discovery. In this case, the Will of William Shakespeare, which is a record held by the National Archives, you have there the catalogue description and the digital asset on the same page, and also seeing it in its archival hierarchy. And the image viewer that we have is deep zoom, and also there's the ability to download PDFs, which are rendered on the fly. And in addition to that, we're now getting a steady flow of born digital content from government departments as well, and it can handle that. So there are videos in there, and there'll be all sorts of other kinds of content in due course. So over the next few years, the amount of data in Discovery is going to ramp up enormously, and which is of course one of the key reasons why we built it, because it's going to be future-proof and sustainable, and it will respond to challenges like that. There are a number of initiatives for leveraging the crowd in Discovery, and more broadly in some of the projects that TNA have been involved in. You've heard of some like Operation War Diary, and then what I've just put on the screen here is our option to tag records. We haven't really reached a critical mass of tagging yet. And someone mentioned earlier on our experiment with Your Archives, which is a wiki that we used to have and was retired. I think this is definitely a challenge still about how these different tools and how we motivate people to contribute and what's in it for them. But we have tagging, and we have Operation War Diary, and we have various other initiatives. So I just put that on there just to show that we are trying new things with Discovery that we weren't doing before. We weren't engaging in that in the old way of doing things. Okay, right. This frightening image of me on screen is what is happening next. So we've done all that. We've got that data in there. How do we make? Thank you. How do we make Discovery a sustainable, dynamic system? How do we make it a service that the archive sector and its users really engage with? Now, the bulk of the data that we have was derived from the A2A project, which actually came to a close in 2008. So we're really interested in refreshing this content and expanding it beyond those 400 archives, and providing a service which will enable archives to surface their content therein. So there are a number of challenges there, not least how we ingest their data. Now we think we're going down the route of using some recognised standards, most notably EAD, but the question then is how we get that data from the services. So we're already developing tools which will enable people to contribute data directly to us. So we're now at a stage again where you go back to a few years ago where I showed you those post-it notes, where we're really trying to engage with the sector and work out what they need from us, what features they want, what we feel that we're able to deliver. And we're trying to capture that user need at the same time as continuing to develop some of the back-end work that we need to do to enable us to control that data. So this is a photograph from a workshop quite recently. I've got the same tie on. and you can see there my colleague Emma Bain, who's the head of systems development at the National Archives, is demoing a wireframe, which I'll show you in a second, and there's some colleagues from the sector. And it's another process of taking down the requirements and writing them up, and then developing what people want in an agile way. So here's one example, for example, of a more transparent image. We showed them a mock-up of a page that we've developed a concept for and asked for some comments. And as it happens, it was a homepage for a particular archive service in Discovery, and that resulted in a whole number of questions. So more flexibility on, they've called it the Archon page, you see, archivists, and this terminology dies hard. How will we get to these pages? Flexibility is key. People might not realise that this page might not have everything. So there's all these kind of things which feed into the melting pot. Here is that mock-up. We conducted some telephone research a month or two ago with archives, and in all of the discussions we had around Discovery, one of the questions that came up was how people would retain their sense of identity and visibility inside this big pot. You've got to remember that some people might only have a handful of collections, so the opportunity to give them a space to put their stamp on it, whilst clearly being in the Discovery ecosystem, is something that's come up as a new requirement, which we didn't necessarily capture a few years ago or just recently. So this is a mock-up for a homepage for one archive service, and it would be a WordPress page, and it would be configurable. Then also is a mock-up of actual directly cataloguing into Discovery. So at the moment we still have a situation where there are a number of different back offices that feed data into the Discovery database. But this is the first step towards having something where you can sort of dynamically interact with the Discovery database itself. So this could be a really powerful tool for smaller archive services who don't necessarily have an online catalogue. And in fact, it's still the case that a number of services don't have that level of access or the resources to sustain and develop one. So it could be a direct tool to, I've been given the 2-minute warning, but fortunately we're nearly over, direct tool to contribute to. So over the next 18 months, we're going to continue to develop those tools. We're going to engage with the archive sector with a view to developing a sustainable community of contributing archive services in order to make Discovery a more comprehensive resource, and I think hopefully realise a long-held ambition of creating a resource that truly reflects the scope of the collections in the archive sector in the UK. The end. Sorry, that last sentence.